Well, good morning, everyone. It's a true honor and pleasure to be here in Iceland, especially to see your country. The beauty that I've seen over the last 5 days has been amazing, and I'm truly honored to be here at your conference and give this talk. Everybody, every day, makes decisions, whether it be leaving your house, getting in your car, driving down the street. But many of us in fire and EMS make decisions in extremis, meaning when you're under extreme stress. And how do we actually make those decisions on a daily basis when we go to work, when we go to the firehouse, when we provide EMS? Although there were some decisions last night, and I can see there's a few empty seats, and I bet some of your colleagues, this is probably one colleague last night. This is how he got home. I'm sure, you know, at the firehouse last night, it was very interesting and to see not only all of you come together as one fire service. In America, we have a one fire service too. However, we are fractured in many ways because of distances. But to see the nationalism that went on last night and the pride that you have in your service has been enlightening for me. As I traveled around the country, one of the things that I realized, you know, I've been in the fire service since I was 16 years old. I started as a young volunteer and in a small town in Rhode Island. And as I grew up in the fire service, it's been 36 years now. I know I don't look that old, but it's the truth. You know, and as a young firefighter, I really embraced not only the calling to the fire service, but also the calling to EMS. And in 1989, prior to some of my folks, even friends being born then, I went to paramedic school. First I went to EMT school and then went on to paramedic school. And it's been an incredible career in the fire service and in EMS. I have a pretty eclectic background when it comes to serving, whether it be in a hospital-based EMS system, private EMS system, and also in a professional fire service department. And now I currently serve as a captain, as a shift commander just south of Boston. But the talk we're going to start off with is going to be on the EMS side, and we're going to also tailor it at the end towards the fire side, because both decision-making, when time is of the essence, there's a science behind that. And if we think about, many of us go about our day, every day, without thinking about the decisions that we make. And we're going to talk about how we do that. But truly, when a life is on the line, high-level cognitive decisions have to have some form of intentionality about how we come to that. And especially when you may not understand it in the moment, but you're going to have to reflect on that, and we're going to talk about it. Because patient care will get worse, will suffer without great decisions, without people who are stepping up to make a decision about what do we do next. And it happens on the fire ground too. If you have any indecision about decision making, whether it be with patient care or on the fire ground, bad things are going to happen, for sure. First and foremost, are you a leader? Many of you don't see yourselves as leaders where you sit in your organization. But I would challenge you that every person that's sitting here, every person who has a part in the fire service and EMS has to be a leader. Because progress at an incident cannot happen without someone stepping up to the plate and saying, this is what we're going to do next. And sick patients will deteriorate if someone is not leading that decision making. And I bet many of you have seen that. I know I have. When I worked for a hospital-based EMS system, we were a non-transport system, which meant that I worked in an SUV, in a car, and we would respond out to meet the fire department ambulances, as well as we would respond to the scene or meet them en route to the hospital. And many times, we had some young EMTs, volunteers, and others, even career, when we would show up on scene and people were not making good decisions, or they weren't making any decisions. And I remember I give a talk to our paramedic students about leadership. Because as a young paramedic, I'll never forget, I came onto a scene, and I was only a paramedic for a few years. And I came onto the scene, and as we were walking up, it was chaos. So multiple vehicle crash. There was 8 or 9 patients. And one of the most senior EMTs within that department turned to me and said, "What do you want me to do?" And in that moment, I thought to myself, what do you mean, what do you want me to tell you to do? Don't you know what to do? But it really was this epiphany moment, this light bulb moment that came to me to say later on in my career, because it wasn't even in the moment that I realized what was really happening. And it wasn't until later on as I began to reflect back and think about that experience. And it wasn't that he didn't know what to do, but he saw me as the leader, and I had to make some high-level decisions very quickly and give him direction. And a lot of times when we're training, many of you, wherever you sit in your organizational level, don't think of yourselves as leaders, because those are for officers, for captains, for chiefs. But no, the lowest level in the organization, and no disrespect, the new person coming in, even the probationary firefighter can be a leader. That probationary EMT or probationary paramedic, I'm not sure what your term is, but that brand new person who just walked in, they're going to have to make high-level decisions. And we need to raise them that way. And I think many times in the fire service and EMS, we lose sight of that. See, because leadership is everyone's responsibility. Whether it be firefighters, EMTs, paramedics, nurses, physicians, it doesn't matter. You all have to be leaders in some level of your organization. And when we think about that, you know, this is a great saying, despite our best effort, the patient still survived. I ask our firefighters all the time, are we lucky or are we good? We all sitting here, if you've been to many EMS calls or many fire calls in your career, you'll say sometimes we were lucky and sometimes we were good. We just hope that the good outweighs the lucky, because sometimes that level of chance can really hurt. And those experiences that you gain when you're lucky have to be reflected upon to learn those lessons. See, when we think about what does it take to make great decisions, you know, and we all know that decisions, right or wrong, have consequences. And those consequences can have positive or negative outcomes to the people that we serve. And then, do we hold ourselves accountable to those decision-making, to the decision-making that we made? What are the consequences? And hopefully we make right decisions, but we are going to make wrong decisions. We're going to talk about why we will today. We have to accept that we're going to make, and we're going to make flawed decisions because of the environment that we work in, because of the dynamic environment of EMS and the fire service. Every day you go to work, something's going to be different. And over time, you're going to see a lot of different things. And we're going to talk about how you make decisions based on all of those past experiences. See, we have to look through the fog. We have to be able to see kind of not so much into the future, but really, we have to bring organization to chaos. And here's a picture of the Boston Marathon. The Boston Marathon post the bombing, just a few minutes after the bombing. I'm sure you're all familiar with that incident. And truly, you know, when we think about a mass casualty incident, and I got some of the gist of the fire that you had here that was talked about yesterday, but when we have incidents where we have to make high-level decisions when time is of the essence, how do we actually do that? What in your brain, what's the neuroscience behind that? When I think about critical decisions, in the moment, when you're at the highest stress level, and think about walk into a patient's home, and from across the room, you can see that, we ask ourselves a couple of things, right? 3 questions. Are they sick? Are they not sick? Or, I'm not sure yet, I need more information. And when we see someone who's sick, if you have experiences in going to EMS calls, you'll recognize that fairly quickly. I bet any of the EMTs and paramedics in the room can see from across the room when you have seen that similar patient before and they look sick. And then you act, right? We'll talk about that. But see, many of those decisions are made intuitively. Malcolm Gladwell is an author, a psychologist, very famous. How many people have read any of Malcolm Gladwell's stuff? Just a few people in the room. He has a book called Blink. It's called The Power of Thinking Without Thinking. And Malcolm Gladwell, in his book, really unpacks how we make decisions based on past experiences. He calls it thin slicing. So you take small pieces of information of things that you've seen in the past, and because you've seen it before and you had an experience and you lived it, you now can see it again. And he, in his book, he begins and talks about this museum, who the curator museum was going to buy this dated statue that was over 1,000 years old. And he brought it in the museum, and the person who was selling it wanted $10 million for the piece. And of course, the museum curator, it's not something that everybody's an expert in, this type of art. But he gathered all the leading experts in this type of statue, and he threw kind of a party for them to show them the work. And one by one, he brought them down to the room where they were holding the statue. And the experts who, in this type of art, one of the first things is they stood there and they looked at the statue and they walked around it. And the first person said, "Wow, what a great reproduction." And the museum curator was just blown away. Now, he hadn't paid the money yet. This is why he had this little exercise. But all his own experts, they took a core sample of the statue from the bottom to ensure that the marble was dated correctly, that it was from the right period and it had aged the right way. And he had his own experts who had looked at it, and they all believed it to be correct. But when he brought in the true experts, the individuals who had studied this art and had seen these statues over and over and over, they could see little pieces of irregularities. And only because they were experts in what they did. And then what does it come to be, how do you become an expert in anything? Right? Many people, how many people have seen I see individuals, they'll write, I'm an expert witness for something. Well, I think it's interesting when you deem yourself an expert on anything, because generally you have knowledge, experiences, education, and other people see you as an expert based on what you've done in the totality of your work in your profession. As the museum curator was just brought in the next person, and that person walks around the statue, stands back, kind of ponders it, and says, "Wow, that's an incredible reproduction." And the museum curator can't believe this. He is just blown away by how these individuals are seeing. "What do you see?" And he would say to him, what do you see? And he'd say, "I'm not 100% sure, but it's just not right." And that's what happens when we think about it. And then Malcolm Gladwell actually codifies what an expert is. And what they did was they studied the first chair violinist in the Vienna Orchestra. And any musician here who's ever played in the orchestra, which I actually did, I was a professional percussionist, and I played in the orchestra. Now, Val came to my house, and bested me on the drums, I will tell you that for sure. But I played in the orchestra. And I really understand how hard it is to gain that first position chair, meaning that's the most coveted position in any orchestra, is the first chair violinist. It's one of the most important parts of the orchestra. And they studied, well, how does that one person be more successful than everyone else? And now, what they found was it took that person about 10,000 more hours of practice, intentional practice, to be successful and be able to hold that first chair position. Now, if you think about 10,000 hours, now, there's some folks that try to debunk that number, and they will argue about that. But if you think about that, what does it take to be an expert in your field? And there's, of course, you know, if you work in a system where you only have 100 calls a year, it's going to take a lot more time than if you have 1,000 calls a year, correct? Right? So you're going to gain different levels of experiences. But that intentional practice of 10,000 hours shows that around that 10,000 hour mark. Well, let's think about that now. If you've been providing going to work every week, and typical work week of about 40 hours. I know there's kind of been some discussion about that, but let's just call it 40 hours, right? And if you take 2 weeks vacation every year, because you have to, I saw yesterday, we have to recharge the batteries, right? So you take 2 weeks vacation every year. See, you didn't think I could understand Icelandic. It was just the pictures, honestly. But so you think about that now. You're there for 2,000. Basically, you have 40-hour work weeks for 50 weeks. That's 2,000 hours. And 2,000 hours times 5 years is 10,000 hours. So does it take 5 years to be an expert in what you do? And it could take longer depending on what your level of exposure is. In America, I don't know what the system is here, but for tradespeople, for electricians, plumbers, carpenters, once they go to school and they come out and they do their internship as a electrician or a plumber or a carpenter, it's called an apprenticeship, and they're an apprentice in their field. They cannot gain licensure as a master electrician or a master plumber in the United States without serving for 5 years. And it's interesting that that 5-year mark would also give them about 10,000 hours in their field. So when folks try to debunk that from Gladwell, we really look at some of the professions and how they did that intuitively. You know, I think in America, we fail many times in EMS because we fail to really, truly understand that level of apprenticeship that's needed for someone to be an expert or at least reach that expert level of decision-making when lives are on the line. Because we don't have an apprenticeship for that length of time. Now, I'm not, you know, some would argue whether it's a year, 2 years, 3 years. I worked in a very, very busy EMS system. And the paramedic car that I was assigned to, that one truck did over 8,000 runs a year. We gain levels of mastery much quicker when you were exposed to high levels and high volumes. So in Gladwell's book, he really unpacks that, and then going back to what does it take. When those experts were looking at that statue and something was off. Something was off. See, when we show up, we see sick patients. We have limited information, and we have to make high-level decisions very quickly. We have to do something, whether it be you interact with the problem, right? You have a patient who's having shortness of breath. Maybe immediately you put them on oxygen. We have to act. We have to do something. But how do we know what to do? See, there's two real simple ways that we make decisions, intuitively or analytically. unfortunately for patients who are really sick, or a fire ground where the fire is developing and growing as you look at it, standing back and pondering for any length of time like those experts would on that statue is not always an option for us. Because bad things are happening to good people, and it's our job to intervene. And it's our job to make a decision. How do we do that? Well, let's talk about Dan Kahneman. Dr. Kahneman is another psychologist who wrote several books, but this one book called Thinking Fast and Slow, Intuitively versus Analytically. How do we think about, how about this? How many of you have been driving along the highway or a road and you missed your exit? Right? How many of you have been driving along the road and don't remember the last 5 minutes of driving along the road? How many of you at 3 in the morning have driven an ambulance and don't remember the first several minutes of that ambulance ride? Right? What happens is our bodies have two systems. And in Kahneman's work, he really unpacks those two systems and talks about how do we make decisions. See, those two systems, System 1 and System 2, System 1 is unconscious, right? We can do things you do things every day without thinking about them. And the best example is driving a car. You don't think, okay, I'm going to get in, I'm going to sit there. Maybe you have to adjust something, but if it's your car, you're not adjusting anything. You push the button, or I don't know if do we turn any keys anymore? Anybody have a key you turn? We push the button, and I'm just showing my age. And we put it in drive, and we begin to drive. We don't think to ourselves, I got to put my hands at 10 and 2 or 9 and 3. I got to engage this to the drive. I'm not thinking about every single decision that I make. I'm not thinking about when I'm driving down the roadway. More so, I'm intuitively driving based on experiences. However, I will tell you, I know many people, just because they have a piece of plastic with their picture on it, does not mean that they can drive, right? I'm sure you have this in this country too, but I'm from Massachusetts, and our traffic system will tell me every day that there are some people that aren't even good at intuitive type of decisions. But these are decisions that are made quickly, instinctive. You do this every day automatically, and you don't even think about it. And many times in fire and EMS, we make these decisions without really thinking about it because we've seen it before. Do you guys use the Dr. Entevi's pediatric system? Anybody have seen that before? The Entevi system for pediatric resuscitation? So it's a new program, been around for a few years in the States. Dr. Entevi is a medical director out of Florida, and he created a system based on this science because I'm sure you all agree, we do not see a lot of pediatric patients in the pre-hospital setting. And then when you have a critically sick child, the level of excitement and extremis generally escalates. And a lot of times based on the emotions of the parents, and especially if you're a parent. See, because you can empathize with how bad the situation really is. If you've ever lost a pediatric patient during a resuscitation, then many of you who are parents will feel the empathy because it hurts. So Dr. Hen, and we, I saw the talk on post-traumatic stress. You want to talk about a post-traumatic stress event is when we have a failed resuscitation of a child, right? And it's not that you failed. And because many times the system itself, how long did it take to get there, the response times, what did people do before you got there, all what we would call in research as confounding variables that led to not only the event, but then after the event, that you have no control over. If you show up at a drowning with a pediatric patient who's maybe 2 or 3 years old, and it took you 12 minutes to get there, 15 minutes to get there, and that's probably realistic in some areas of Iceland. I know it's realistic in some places in America, not where I work because it's very congested. I'm in a small, a town about 45,000 people, and our response times are generally within 5 to 6 minutes. However, if you move that timeline out, we know, just based on physiology, that the chance of resuscitation, and really the goal of resuscitation, right, is to be able to hand back that child back to their parents neurologically intact, right? Not just to gain a pulse, but more so to fully resuscitate that individual, that whether it be an adult or a child, and turn them back neurologically intact to their family. That's the goal. Now, unfortunately, what happens is providers get there when, and the odds are stacked against them for that. Now, all of a sudden, you feel the totality of that experience weighing down and pushing down as the parents and the people around them, their friends, their family, are screaming and yelling, and you're trying to do your job. And this is where we don't want people to stand back and think conscious thought. See, the difference really when we think about System 1 and System 2, slow, conscious, complex decisions, more reliable, these decisions are when you have discretionary time. I like to say, how many top-level leaders we have in organizations, chiefs, deputy chiefs? I always say, there's no HR emergency, right? In human resources, there's never a human resource emergency, right? If you have an employee who did, firefighter, an EMT, or paramedic who did something stupid, I'll say it, okay, so they did something that they shouldn't have done, or you have some issue that you have to deal with from a personnel issue. Those are never decisions you make with System 1. Though you have discretionary time. But when time is of the essence, when you have to perform and you have to make a high-level decision, you're going to do that intuitively. And really what it comes down to is using your gut feeling. And by the way, there's some neuroscience that talk about how they're very similar cells in your gut to neurocells, right? So why do you feel like, I've seen this before, you have this gut instinct? Where does that really come from? Well, whether we use our gut or we use our brain can make a big difference in the way that we make a decision when someone's really sick or the fire is growing rapidly. About 80% of critical time-based decisions are made using intuition. Gary Klein, who is another psychologist, who came up with a model of decision-making. And he actually really wanted to understand what happens. So when we look at this, we think, well, we have an experience. And then that experience, something happens, right? You show up on scene. Something happens. Your gut takes over. So you see it. Why? Because you've had that experience before. So you have this gut instinct. You have your gut and your heart, right? So you have emotions. You've seen it before. And when you see it before, you wash it through this kind of decision-making process. And we're going to break this down even further because I think it's important that you truly understand what happens. Now, there are some problems with intuitive-based decision-making. Sometimes you get flawed information, or you don't understand what you're seeing. And that can be the worst, is you're not really sure what you're seeing. Or you bring some emotional biases unconsciously to the decision-making process. And Oh, I haven't seen, I'm sure you have homeless people. I haven't seen it much since I've been here in Iceland. But I would imagine that you must have some, right? And in America, I'm sure in the last several years, especially during the pandemic, you've seen how bad our homeless situation has been. And even in the city of Boston right now, and there's a lot of reasons for homelessness. It's not just that they lack social access to programs. Many of them are truly mental health issues, drug addiction. It's a very complicated problem. You know, as I travel the world, I've been to a lot of different places. In every third world country I go to, I come home, people would say to me, well, you know, what was it like in the Philippines? Well, and when you think about what's the poverty like, and I was in São Paulo, Brazil, in the favelas, and when you see the poverty there's the difference between homeless people, I'm sure here in Iceland, homeless people in America, and homeless people in São Paulo, Brazil, and in the Philippines, and in any third world country. And the difference is there's no parachute. There's no social parachute where people can go get a meal. I was in San Diego giving a talk at a conference, and there were some homeless folks in the park. And as I walked by, one of them said to me, you know, asked me for some money because he wanted to get some food. And I said, sir, listen, I'd be more than happy to buy you any food. Come on, you know, come. We'll go to the coffee shop. And he's like, well, I got a bad leg, and he's giving me all excuses. I said, well, you stay right here. I'm going to go get you some. I came back. I got a coffee. I got some rolls. I'm not telling you the story to more impress upon you. This is the social system we have. So I bring back some, and a couple other homeless guys are sitting with him now. And he told me how, you know, the story he told me was he was a veteran and all this, you know, and I have a level of, I'm not so sure I believe him. However, I'm going to give him the benefit of the doubt. So I buy him some coffee rolls and some pastries and some coffee. And I come back, and there he sits with his friends. And I said to him, I said, sir, here you go. Listen, I bought you some coffee. And he goes, oh, thank you so much. He opened his, and he goes, oh, you put cream in it. I said, geez, I'm sorry. I didn't know how you took it. And he's like, and he opens up the bag. This is a true story. He opens the bag, and he looks inside. He's like, oh, I can't eat that. I said, you can't eat that. And he goes, no, I got diabetes. He goes, I can't eat all those things. I said, well, clearly beggars can be choosers. However, you know, the guys that were sitting next to him were like, I'll have it, and they take it. And then, so I said to one of the other guys, I said to him, and he kind of walks over to the other thing, kind of upset that I bought him these things that he couldn't eat. He didn't tell me that before I left. But they told me how the food truck comes around twice a day, every day, to feed the homeless. So he's not hungry, but he really just wanted money for alcohol. And I would rather buy somebody some food than give them money for their addiction. It's just my personal thing. And anyway, but the point is that we have social systems and social parachutes that will help those people. And a lot of times, when, especially in America, we might get a call to one of these areas, and I know that some of our folks show up with emotional biases because we go there all the time. We deal with all these social. In America, the ambulances take care of many of the underserved individuals. And I like to say that, you know, so I have 3 children. My son worked as an EMT in the city. My daughter worked as an EMT, and she's now an emergency room nurse at our trauma center in Boston. Both of them worked out in the field. And when one of the things that I used to impress upon them is that we take care of a subculture of America that no one sees. Right? We intimately go into people's homes and the way they see the way they live. And I know some of our students here have been to America and seen some of the subculture of America that mainstream is not popularizing. So a lot of times we have these emotional biases when we show up. And then a lot of times we're not considering alternatives. So these are some of the problems, and we're going to talk about how we get there, but these are some of the problems and the prejudice that we have. And then we have, I think a lot of times you have to be open to suggestion sometimes, because a lot of times we'll talk here in a few minutes about perspective. But it cannot be my way or the highway, meaning we're on a call. If you and I are partners, it might be, what's your name, sir? Magnus? Magnus. Okay. Magnus. Yeah. Okay, all right. That was an easy one. But I might turn to Magnus and say, hey, what do you think? And he'll say to me, I don't know, what do you think? And then sometimes we just say, okay, let's go, meaning we're going to go to the hospital. But I might not be seeing something. He might say, hey, Brad, do you see this? So I also have to be willing to accept a different view. And then sometimes problems with intuitive decision-making is because an individual lacks experiences, lacks mental models to make good decisions. Now, I think intuitively, we all can see that this is probably bad in some way, right? And if you've ever been to this call, we all know that you're going to pry that out of his dead cold hand, right? You're not taking that cigarette away from this individual, and he's on oxygen at home, and it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. For him at that point, it doesn't matter. We have to accept that too. We can't be judgmental. I've seen too many people get, and I just say, sir, listen, we're all here now, and I know that you smoke all the time with oxygen, and I personally have actually been to calls where oxygen has fed that cigarette fire and had second and third degree burns on their face. But and we'll try to just convince them to put it out in a nice way. But we all know intuitively that that's wrong. That when we walk in, and I don't mean that it's wrong to judge him, but that this could lead to bad things in the immediate moment. Right? So if we're just putting one picture up there, intuitively, you all made a decision about this. So in Gary Klein's work, he talks about a model of decision-making that helps him or helps us be successful. And he came up with this term called recognition-primed decision-making. So how do people, when time is of the essence, in extremis, make high-level cognitive decisions when people's lives are on the line? And it's 3 steps. We experience the situation. We analyze it. And then we make a decision and act. Very simple. It seems simple, but it's not always simple. Right? And how many people here have heard of recognition-primed decision-making? This is the basis for the decision-making that many of you do every single day. And we're not consciously thinking about it after the call, about how did we make that decision and what did that really look like. So how did Klein come up with this? Well, Klein, again, he's a psychologist. In the mid-'80s, he was contracted by the U.S. Army to understand and study how battlefield commanders on the battlefield could make high-level decisions, or how they have in the past and how they could be better in the future about making decisions on the battlefield. How do you move a mechanized group to a certain area based on what they're seeing the enemy's doing? And truly, making those, and coming post-Afghanistan and Iraq, we had a lot of high-level commanders who had a lot of battles under their belt, and they made a lot of decisions, and they kind of rethought this, but what they came to is this still held up. See, because in the 80s, there was no wars to study. And really what the Army was trying to do was trying to understand how people in the past had made these decisions. So Klein had this thought, like, where do people go to battle right now, every day in America? On the fire ground, especially in the 80s. When I was a firefighter in the mid-80s, we went to fires all the time. Several a week. Sometimes almost every day. We had a lot of fires. And we had lack of fire prevention and all those things. But, in the 80s, especially, in the late 70s and the early 80s and through into the 90s, the American Fire Service had a lot of fires. We had a lot of fire deaths, too. So what Klein did was he went out and he interviewed and then wrote along with some fireground commanders. Because he really wanted to understand how on the fireground, right, because you're going to battle, the fire is our enemy. We know, because of building construction, how fire is going to move and travel and how it's going to do certain things and how people get themselves in harm's way. And what he found was that over 80% of the decision points and the strategy that used on the fire ground was based on experiences, based on the past knowledge of that individual fire ground commander who is making high-level decisions based on looking, and then later on, Dave Dobb came out with a class called Reading Smoke, looking at the volume, the pressure, how the color of the smoke, how it was moving through the building. All those things that these fire ground commanders, for years, as they grew up, and they grew up as firefighters, as lieutenants, as captains, as battalion chiefs, and now you're standing in front of that fire building, and you have to make decisions about putting people in harm's way. Very similar to what happens on the battlefield. So what Klein figured out was that as he interviewed he'd go to fires with them, he'd take notes to see how they were making decisions, and then he would go back to the firehouse and they would kind of unpack what just happened. And he came up with that 80% are made based on experiences. They directly identify that situation, the way that they had this kind of standard protocol. And it was interesting to watch the video yesterday of that fire, especially the one before the fire trucks got there. And immediately I started to hear glass breaking. And as I watched the color of that and the pressure and volume of the smoke, immediately I thought, oh my goodness, bad things are about to happen. Because I also have been standing in front of that fire building for years, and I was an engine officer for 15 years. And I know that when you start breaking windows and you start, without the placement of a hose line, that you just change the flow path. And bad things are going to happen, because I've seen it many times. Just hearing the glass break, I literally started to get chills. I just knew that bad things were going to happen. I couldn't even understand what you were saying, but I just could just see that video. And I just knew that, one, there were still people. And then you saw someone breaking a window. And if someone's breaking a window, you know they can't open it, right? And they've come to it, and they're fighting for their life. And then you saw, we've proven over and over and over again that people will jump before they burn, for the most part, right? I mean, look at the World Trade Center. People are jumping 1,000 feet. They know they're not going to survive, but it said jump or burn. So what Klein, as he continued to do this, he looked at these kind of benchmarking or wave points in the way that they made decisions and how they handled them. And he noticed that they only considered one option. They only considered one option. Hold on to that. And what they did was they emphasized that use of the recognition rather than pondering, rather than calculating. You have to make rapid decisions. When you get off that fire truck, when you walk in that house, when someone's really sick, and you see bad things happening to good people, we have to make a decision now. If we don't, people's lives may be lost. So how do we do that? Well, we have a situation. It seems familiar. You see something that you've seen in the past. See, experiences are like a slideshow in your mind. And when you need them, they recall. Now, many of you can't think of, maybe if you laid in bed and thought about something. It's funny with paramedic students, they'll say to me, I don't know if I have all the information. Well, until we test you, right? Until we put you under stress and test you, I can't go to one of our students and say, well, I want you to think about page, 792 and tell me what's on that page. That's not possible, right? I mean, maybe one person who's got some type of photographic memory, but other than that, that's not possible. And it really comes down to the ability to recall, because where does that come from? It's neural, right? We've made some neural connections about information, and when you need it, you're going to bring them about, and then you're going to make decisions. So, and because it's going to look familiar to you. So is it familiar to you? If it is, then we're going to propose a course of action fairly quickly. If you're facing a new situation, you've never seen it before, your brain is going to look for similarities. Have you ever seen anything that's close to this? And if it's close, then you're going to make a decision about what should we do next, right? How can we, and this could be anything. You know, you get to an extrication that you know, maybe it's a tractor trailer, a big truck. Those are sometimes very, very challenging. You know, how's the or maybe you have a train derailment. Do you have trains here? I didn't see any. No trains. Well, you don't have to worry about that. In my city, we have we have a rail system. We have a regular freight system, but we also have a commuter rail, and we have a high-speed rail that comes through our town. So, you know, we have a number of challenges. Plus, we have a major interstate, and you know, I'll tell you, almost every day, our firefighters, we're out on that interstate, dealing with all kinds of challenges, whether it be and the methyl ethyl bad stuff that travels along there from a hazmat standpoint. All you hazmat folks, I'm happy to have you. I'm not a hazmat guy, but we have hazmat teams in our state. But you know, all those things that you may not have experiences, but you might have some experience that kind of aligns, and that's how, you know, you kind of start to resort to what we call optimizing decision making. But if it does look familiar, you're going to propose a course of action very quickly. In your head, you're going to run through this process and say, I've seen it work in the past, it's got to work now, or will it work? And then you act, right? You implement that course of action. And that happens so quickly, we don't even think about it. And that's that intuitive-based decision-making. Now, when time's not of the essence, we stand back, we say, many hazmat calls, right? Because generally a hazmat, once we get to that point, may not be that immediate situation where maybe you have to stand back and take charge of what's going on. And we have to think about, you know, what are we dealing with? What kind of product is it? What's the life hazard from it? So if we simplify it even more, we really begin to use our expertise to recognize similar situations. We find one option. We simulate it mentally. Will it work? And then we act. And we implement that decision. And then we send our people into harm's way. Or we take care of that really sick patient. See, we do not plan to fail. When you make intuitive decisions and you go to act, we don't have plan B. There's no plan B. Think about this now. Many of you are like, well, I was taught that we should have plan A, plan B, plan C, plan D, whatever, that I should have some backup plan. And you might have a backup plan because when you learn and you gain knowledge, then we're telling you that if these things in a mental model don't work, then you should do something else. But also, too, we're also, you know, we're going to have a problem. We're going to interact with the problem in some meaningful way. But we don't have plan B. We don't say, well, if this doesn't work, we're going to do this. Because if this isn't going to work, why would you do that? You wouldn't, right? You wouldn't do that. You'd say, nope, we're not going to do that. This is what we're going to do. And until we try that, then we won't know if it's going to work or not. But we also have to be open to accept the facts that, hey, what we're doing is not working. And many times I've seen at EMS calls and I'm on the fire ground where individuals will stay with plan A even though they're failing. And because their ego gets in the way of making good decisions. See, egos eat brains, right? We've seen it, I'll tell you right now, whether it be with patient care or on the fire ground, egos get in the way of good decisions. But we have to be ready to say, you know what, we're not doing well. I have a little video here. Now, there's going to be a prize. There's going to be a prize for the person that can come up with the numbers of actually how many. We're going to watch this video, and we're going to pass the ball around. And it's going to ask you to count. And at the end, I want to show of hands who had the right number. Okay? Anybody ever see this video? See a couple people? Okay. You think you've seen this one. Let's see.
Illusion.
All right, here we go.
Count how many times the players wearing white pass the ball. The correct answer is 16 passes. Illusion.
How many people? Oh, I think I screwed it up.
Count how many times the players wearing white
We're going to let this run a
pass the
minute because
ball.
I can't move it forward. But how many people counted 16? How many people? Okay. Sir, did you see the gorilla? You saw the gorilla? How many people didn't see the gorilla? Oh, everybody did. Okay. So you've probably seen that. But how about this? Let's see here in a second. Did you see the gorilla? How many? You didn't see the gorilla? Okay, thank you for being honest. Because I remember the first time I saw this video, I didn't see the gorilla. And people were like, what do you mean the gorilla?
The correct
So,
answer
16
is 16
passes. And he's saying he didn't see the gorilla.
Did
Watch,
you spot the gorilla?
Did you spot the gorilla?
For people who haven't seen or heard about a video like this before, about half missed the gorilla.
You didn't see the gorilla?
If you knew about the gorilla, you probably saw it. But did you notice the curtain changing color or the player on the black team leaving the game?
Now, did you notice that? No, right?
Let's rewind.
Because some of you
and
who've
watch it
seen the
again.
gorilla, they changed the video, right? They said, oh, everybody's seen the gorilla now. And now they said,
Here comes
now,
the gorilla, and there goes a player, and the curtain is changing from red to gold. When you're looking for a gorilla, you often miss other unexpected events.
so see, when you knew about the video and you knew about the gorilla and you said, oh, I know this game. But what happened? Around you, your situational awareness was changing. And a lot of times, you know, this is a exercise. I spent a year at Harvard at the NPLI, the National Preparedness Leadership Initiative. And one of the things that we talked about at Harvard was also this perspective on problems. How do we see it? How do we view it? Now, this is called the cone and the cube exercise. If I see a problem, or if I look in this cube, and I look through peephole A, I see this cone. But if somebody else, if I took you, sir, and I put you in, and said, I want you to look at the peephole B, and I give you a different perspective. And really, this is what you see. If you're looking at peephole B, you're going to see a circle. And if you're looking at the other side in peephole A, you're going to see a triangle or a cone. And there's no way, if I put you two in a room and said, what did you see? And you're going to say, well, I saw a cone. And he's like, oh, that wasn't a cone. I saw a circle. And no matter what, I could never get the two of you to agree ever. However, if he said to you, no, I'm telling you, you got to believe me. I'm telling the truth. I don't know what you're seeing, but you got to come see what I see. Come over here. And I bring you over, and we look into the other hole. And I give you a different perspective. And because you would have, now all of a sudden, because the two of you be butting heads and yelling at each other. No way, I saw a circle, especially in a firehouse, right? You're not going to, unless you really invite that person over to say, come see what I see, then you would never convince them. And this is why in high-level decision-making, sometimes somebody will say, hey, did you see this? Inma, did you see this? And you have to be open to say, no, let me take a look. But too many times, individuals get stuck in their own view. And because they're stuck in their own view, they're not open to other people's perspectives on a problem. When lives are on the line, we have to take that other perspective. And there are some times, and I know I've been on the fire ground sometimes when, especially as the fire ground commander, where I'll say to the company, the engine company, I need you to go do this. And the engine officer might say, hey, Brad, do you see this? And I'll say, no, I didn't see that. Hold on, let's think about what we're doing now. Or it might be, yes, I've taken that consideration. I still want you to go do it. Do it now. And at the end, you notice there was no question. We weren't going to have a discussion anymore, right? I heard you real quick. I took that into consideration. And what did I say? Do it now. That's it. We're over. There's no more discussion. Because sometimes in extremis, you have to make those high-level decisions. You might want to take in just a half a second of, hey, do you see this? I've seen that. I still want you to do it. Go do it now. No more discussion. But there might be other times when I am going to make a bad decision. And it's happened to me, where someone would say, hey, have you seen this? Or I get a report from the other side of the building. My Charlie side, the C side of the building, I get a report from, our safety officer to say, this is what we're seeing over here. We need you to evacuate the building. So you have to take that 1 second, that gain a different perspective. See, because there's really no intuitive or naturalistic decision making. There's no correct decision, right? There's no single correct decision. Somebody might have a suggestion, you do something differently. And it would still lead to the same outcome. Do you really take in all those, those possibilities? We don't ponder in extremis where time is of the essence. When we have discretional time, we ponder. But really, this is where that recognition prime decision-making model comes from. Chief Bobby Halton, if you know him, he's the former chief from Mexico, New Mexico, from Albuquerque, and he's also the editor of Fire Engineering. And he once said at a conference, and this was so impactful to me that I literally wrote it down. And he said, experience without reflection and understanding is just interesting. Meaning, what do you do after a call? Do you have a post-incident analysis or some incident action review or whatever you might call it? Do you really talk about the problems in a real meaningful way? And I'm not talking about a week later when the lives are made up on the fire ground. We all know that, right? But we're talking about in the moment, like when you start to really reflect and do you understand the experience? And sometimes you have an experience and you don't understand it. And it took me many years to really think about this. When I was a young firefighter, one of the challenges we have in the New England Fire Service and throughout the country is balloon frame buildings, from a building construction standpoint. Is anybody, a balloon frame building is, they took the exterior of the building, they built it on the ground, they then pulled the walls, the exterior walls up, then they put the floors, and there's no fire stops from the basement all the way to the roof. Now where I work, the preponderance of buildings, multifamily building, apartment buildings, in all of the Massachusetts, are from the 1800s, late 1800s through the early 1900s, were all built this way. So when we have a fire in the basement, we also have to send crews to every floor, including the attic, because the fire spread is very quickly through those exterior walls. And actually and not only do they go up all the way to the roof, but they also come horizontally, because there's void spaces between the floors that go all the way out to the exterior walls. So there's void spaces in the floors, void spaces on the exterior. So as a young firefighter, I was like 17 years old, and one of the first, I was excited. We went to this fire. It was a fire on the first floor. We pull up. There's fire out the front windows. The first engine company stretches in. They're knocking the fire down. And I get orders with my engine officer to go to the second floor. So we get to the second floor, and we force the door. And I remember I get in there with the nozzle, and I look, and every plug, electrical plug, is burning in that room. And it was a very, very sparse apartment, very low end of the socioeconomical scale. I think there was like one couch in there, one little old TV. But the plugs were burning. And then all of a sudden we get the all out, like the horns. In that time we didn't have radios, So the all out was the sirens and the air horns were being blown. And that's because, and so we get outside and we get out and I turn around and the roof is burning off. This is a fire that started in the first floor. So we've put the fire out. We go back to the firehouse. And I remember sitting at the kitchen table, because everything happens at the kitchen table, right? I'm sitting at the kitchen table, and I said to one of the senior firefighters, I said, I can't believe how quickly that electrical fire got going. And he said to me, what are you talking about, electrical fire? It wasn't an electrical fire. I said, no, I was on the second floor, and all the plugs were burning. It was electrical fire. And he said, no, you idiot. He said, the lady was cooking French fries, and she went downstairs to do her laundry and left the hot oil burning on the stove, and that's what caused the fire. And I was like, well, why were all the plugs burning? He said, because the fire was in the walls, and the least path of resistance was the plug. So the fire is coming out the plug. But see, I had never had that experience, and I lacked the knowledge, because I was just a young 17-year-old kid fighting fires like we shouldn't be. Crazy to think about what we did then. But it was that, I never had that experience. And that's really when I began to codify those kind of experiences and think about it. There's another decision making by John Boyd. John Boyd was a Navy pilot, and he wanted to understand how pilots made the decision to land their aircraft on the aircraft carrier, whether everything was correct, or should they bug off and go around, right? And if you've ever watched any the movies, like the Tom Cruise movie, Top Gun, you know, when they land on a carrier and they'll say, call the ball, right? And everybody heard that terminology, call the ball? Well, inside the older aircrafts, there was this little compass, and everything would have to align up. And they have a landing signal officer, an LSO. And the landing signal officer has a TV, and they can see the yaw and pitch of the deck and how the aircraft is coming in. And the landing officer, it's his or her job to decide in the moment with the pilot, do they have the right flight path? Is it going to be okay? Can they land the aircraft? If not, they hit the button and a red light comes up and they go around. But really, Boyd wanted to understand how these pilots made this decision. And I think this is critical in the way that we make decisions in extremis. So first, we have a situation, and we have to gain situational awareness, right? How do we do that? By visualizing being there, not letting the emotions of the situation run amok, because there's a lot of neuroscience about situational awareness. And here, you know, here's that I'm a young kid. I had another experience a couple of years after that where we're inside the fire building and we're making really good headway. We're knocking the fire down and we think we're doing a great job. And we get the all-out signal. And I remember coming out, and my company officer says to the chief, why did you pull us out? We're making really great headway. We get the fire knocked down. What's the problem? And literally, the chief just stood there like this, like a disgusted look, pointing. And we turn around, and on the third floor, 4 windows on the third floor, fire's blowing out them, and fire's now up, coming out of the roof. See, our situational awareness, we were in a box. We didn't have the big picture, right? So the fireground commander had a much bigger picture. He had a 10,000-foot view. Well, we're fighting a little fire in a box. And when it comes to patient care, how many times have you gone into the hospital where the physician takes a step back and maybe stands at the foot of the bed? And the nurses and the techs and the folks that are helping, and that person really just becomes the individual who has great situational awareness and is making high-level cognitive decisions about what they see because they have the best view. And so we have to observe the situation. We have to get oriented to it. We have to understand what we're seeing, because sometimes we don't. Like as a young firefighter, I didn't know what I was seeing. I didn't realize the true danger that I was in. And sometimes those lessons come too late. You didn't recognize the patterns with the patient, and the patient deteriorated and went into cardiac arrest. Or you're on the fire ground and you didn't realize that you're surrounded by all the walls in the ceiling by fire, and just one little hole could end your life. And that happened in my department. We lost a very experienced career firefighter in a rooming house fire. And a rooming house is a room. In this room, there was 32 rooms. I see, some of the similar things that you were talking about yesterday in the warehouse. This wasn't actually a warehouse, but it's called a SRO, a single resident occupancy. And we have them all over the place. You have an 8x8 room that people have no money. It's very cheap to live there. And on each floor, there's a common kitchen and a common bathroom. So they have one little room, and they have a social kitchen. And our firefighter crawled into this room doing a search because there were reported people still up on the 3rd floor. And those occupancies, they have, by code, they have to have a spring-loaded door. So when he crawled in, the door shut behind him. They theorized that he heard the fire pushed up through the ceiling, and the fire came down and caught him in a flashover and killed him. Sometimes those lessons are really hard to learn. And despite this man had many, more than 20 years on our department, still got caught. I'm not saying it's his fault. I'm just saying that that's what happened, right? So you have to have orientation. You have to decide in that moment, right? In that moment, based on the situational awareness I have, to make a decision, and then you have to act. But this really is what's going on in your mind. And it happens in a very, very quick couple of seconds. So you observe the situation, you orient yourself to it, then you make a decision, and then you act and move forward. So let's see how it works. We have to observe. What am I seeing? What do I see here when I first walk in? I open the door and I see Mrs. Smith. She's laying on the floor. I see a cane next to her. Her glasses are off. She looks like she's in pain. All these things that I'm seeing from across the room begin to help me make decisions. But again, I have to be open to the reality of the situation. And I also have to keep an open mind while I'm doing it. Because as you can see here, if I'm standing on the left side, I see 4. And if I'm standing on the right side, I see 3. And unless I bring you over and show you my side, you're never going to agree with me. And then when we think about how do we orient ourselves to the problem, right? Why is this happening? So what do I see? Why is this happening? And then what can I do about it? What's the problem? Why is it happening? What can I do about it? And that's where that decision comes in. When that one thing, and we have to decide, what's the one thing right now that I can do that make this better? And that's the key, is act. And once you decide to say, this is what I'm going to do, and this is what needs to be done first. And we see this all the time in training paramedics, where they come in and you have this patient, the description is the patient is ashen, diaphoretic, they're tachypnic, they have wet lung sounds, they're hypertensive and tachycardic, and you hear audible rowels from across the room. If you've ever, and they're just profusely sweating. If you've ever had that patient who's in left ventricular failure and has pulmonary edema, which many of you have probably had that mental model based on what I just said, because you've seen that patient over and over and over again. And then you have to think to yourself, what's the one thing that makes this better now? Right? When that patient's work of breathing is really, really hard, they're really struggling, what do I do first? And then you have to do that first. Right? And so many times in our lab, we see paramedic students, young paramedic students come in and they start asking Mrs. Smith 1,000 questions, right? Because they were taught an assessment that started with OPQRST, right? They started some assessment, and they're asking this lady who can't breathe a bunch of questions. And that person can't answer. And see, that's where giving them different mental models, especially in simulation, can help them understand, how do I actually act? See, preparing to make those decisions, that self-talk. See, if you think you can, or you think you can't, you're right. You have to really think about situational awareness. Peter Blader was a Delta Force commander. Wrote a great book called Mission Men and Me. But one of the stories in here, he talks about how they were in the mountains in Colorado. And it was nighttime and completely pitch black. And he had lost his flashlight. He had no light. And all he could hear was, he had been told stories of the grizzly bears and the black bears that were in the area. and how all of a sudden he heard this crashing, bam, 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 and he heard this animal, and he started to freak out. Despite all of his training as a Delta Force commander, he didn't have a gun, and what did he do? He started running because he thought there was a bear, and he couldn't see. It was pitch black. There was no moon. It was overcast. And he began to run and run and run. He tripped and he fall and he get up and he's running again because he thinks there's a bear chasing him, because that's all he could think of is in his head. And he climbs up a tree, which is really stupid because bears climb trees really well. But he climbs this tree, and after a few minutes, it kind of settles in. And it's coming to dawn, and light is beginning to come. And he's up in this tree, and he's holding on for dear life. And finally, he looks down, and he sees that it's a boar. Now, boars can be dangerous, but not like a bear. But see, his situational awareness was clouded. He didn't understand the problem. And he really comes with the saying, don't get treed by a chihuahua, right? You ever see those little dogs, the little yippy dogs? Like, the situation, understand the situation before you make these crazy decisions. And at the MPLI, we learned that you have to stay out of the basement. Emotionally, you have to stay out of the basement. So how many people have been at a scene where one person is yelling and screaming on the radio, whatever it is, whether it's a car accident, on a fire ground, somebody who's screaming on the radio, that person has lost control. I bet you all have one or two of those, right? And what's happening emotionally, their amygdala in their brain is getting hijacked chemically by epinephrine, norepinephrine, and their body is, and see, they go to the basement because the basement's a scary place. This is where the boiler is. It's dark down there. And emotionally, they're in a bad way. And this is really your own fight or flight system, right? Your autonomic nervous system is kicking in. Can you control it? Can you recognize that I'm in the basement, I need to get out? Taking a few deep breaths, box breathing, in for 4 seconds, hold for 4 seconds, out for 4 seconds, will really help you calm. Because see, if you're going to make a high-level decision, you have to stay out of the basement. Because if you don't, emotionally, you're not going to make great decisions. So really, how does this apply to patient care? Well, like I said, we walk in the door, we do a doorway assessment. What do I see? Does it even make sense, what I'm seeing? Because sometimes you have to ask yourself, and what I see here, does this make sense to me? What are the critical clues, the cues that you're seeing, and what are the expectations of what you thought you were seeing? And then, do I have any emotional biases that would get in my way to make a high-level decision? But it really comes down to 3 questions. Very simple. What's the problem? Why is it happening? And what can I do about it? And when it comes down to patient care, when we start to ask things like, why is it happening? What's the pathophysiology behind a disease process that's causing this problem? And do I have anything in my toolbox as a provider that I can help with this problem, whether it be a medication, some type of intervention? And that's the other thing we have to truly understand. So we have to make these high-level decisions. We have to make a decision, we have to execute, and then we have to think about it. Do that one thing first. Put it into the loop. Does it make sense? Real quick, decisions, how do we do this on the fire ground? Well, we have a problem. We see the problem. We have to make a decision. We analyze it, and then we have to act. And then we have to accept the information that comes back. So we have a problem. We interact with the problem in a meaningful way. And then based on what happened, if I put a hose line on this or whatever, now we have to make the next decision. I'm going to play one quick video, and we're almost done here. I know I'm going over just a minute here. But watch all the decisions that they make here. This is an apartment complex that we had a fire at.
You want a regular line or Cambridge?
Cambridge will go a long way. Around the back, guys. The back side.
What floor?
3rd floor. This building right here.
Back side. Door here, you think?
Yep.
Is there fire coming out yet?
Fire's coming out the back, yep. Hey, what did he say?
So go in that door or go around back? Go look around back. So there's fire coming out. I don't know. Take that one over there.
What did he say?
Second or third. Listen, I'm gonna go around this back side here. I'll stretch to that door, and you tell me to come around back, or we're going through this door.
Now, there's good communication with, we call him a jump seat, but our firefighter or smoke diver, with the officer. They're making high-level decisions right now about how they're going to stretch this line. This is a large apartment complex with a center hallway, and we have fire on the second floor. I was the second new engine officer on this fire.
I got no tools, buddy.
He's telling his firefighter now, make the stretch this way.
Buddy, give me a hand.
If they didn't make decisions, they would have went right in that front door.
Right.
Not optimal. So these two made a bunch of decisions in just in the first few seconds, and they took the time to communicate, make high-level decisions about where they were going to make that stretch. First, the smoke diver got out and said to the people, this is 6:30 in the morning. That place is packed with people. There are over 100 people that live in that building. And the thing is, the key is, we've had this fire before. This is that fire that morning, but we've had this fire before. The building just to the left, about 4 years ago, we had almost the exact same fire on the second floor. We learned a lot. Remember, if you heard him say, we're going to stretch this way, we're going to hit it from the back like we talked about. We learned earlier about, we burned the roof off of this building about 5 years prior to that. This time, we kept the fire to that apartment and the apartment above, based on these high-level decisions. I'm not going to play this. So you have knowledge, skills, and ability, and education. They end up because experience matters. We have to connect the neural dots, and that's the key, is you have knowledge, but experience matters. And understanding the experience that you had matters. We all know the story about Sully Sullinger, who put the airplane in the Hudson. He did that intuitively based on experiences. And really, when you have to make decisions, ignore the noise, do your job, and really, let's make sure that no one assaults the paramedics. And then at the end of the day, if you ever come to America, don't let any Icelandics at Walmart. All right, thank you, everyone.